Hello and welcome to Talking WoW, the podcast where we talk about World of Warcraft, believe it or not. My name is Tom, and today we are going to be talking about what the Microsoft Activision Blizzard deal means for World of Warcraft. And to do that, we have a very special guest. We are joined by games journalist Ed Nightingale. Hey Ed, thanks for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
And of course, we have the co-host of Talking WoW, Marty. Hey Marty.
Hello, I'm not a journalist.
No, you are not, but Ed is here and we are really excited to get Ed's perspectives on this whole deal because it has been running on for a little while, one might say. Almost 2 years in the making. The most historic deal in video game history sees Microsoft buy out Activision Blizzard King for just a mere $68.7 billion. Ed, I'm going to start with you because I know you've been writing a lot of articles about this over the many, many months. Did you actually think this was going to go through? Did you think this was going to finally navigate all its legal hurdles to actually happen?
I mean, yeah, there have been a lot of legal hurdles. It's been... I think it's 20 months, I think it was January 2022 that this was first announced. So it's been a really long time coming. There have been a lot of objections, a lot of expected objections, I think. You know, PlayStation, Sony are obviously going to turn around and say, no, we don't want this to happen. Of course not. So, of course there have been objections, but whether they really had that much merit, I'm not really too sure. I feel like this was probably always going to happen. It was sort of inevitable. It was just going through the motions legally of, you know, all these different objections, all these different court cases just to see, okay, is this going to happen? And it finally has. And in a lot of ways, I feel quite relieved now that at least we know it's happened. We don't have to worry about it anymore. I can stop writing stories about, will this happen anymore? It's happened. We can just move on with our lives now.
Yeah, and I mean, I think from my perspective, and maybe yours, Marty, you can weigh in on this. Without being, obviously you're a journalist, Ed, so this is very like a focal thing. It's a big, massive thing. As gamers, we were just sitting there being like, oh, okay, like just waiting for it to happen. And I think much like you're saying as well, just expecting it to happen. I think when you're hearing, if Microsoft wants to buy something, like they're probably going to buy it, when there's that much money involved. And probably one of the first time I really kind of sat up and took note of this story was when it was actually the UK that put a block on this deal, and it was actually surrounding cloud gaming. And not to get political or anything, but I was like, the UK blocking, some big money deal that, obviously some envelopes have not reached where they've meant to go or something like that. But it was just like, okay, this is actually interesting, but the whole like cloud gaming side of it was just a delay to this. And it was like, well, I don't really understand that. But what about you, Marty? Like, how have you been like taking in this whole story over the months? Because for me, like I say, it hasn't really been probably a big thing until we've reached these later stages.
I mean, I think I was a little bit excited about the whole thing in the beginning, but then, everything just started dragging out. And then I think, for me at least, it just got pushed to the side, to the back of my head, and wasn't probably until, last week when it finally went through that it popped back into my point of view. So yeah, that's where I'm from right now. That it hasn't really been something I've thought too much about. Basically, just been waiting, I guess.
So one of the interesting things about seeing this deal finally close is the reaction to like the various communities in general. You've got, obviously a big Xbox fan base there as well. And something I've noticed in the Blizzard fan base, and again, much like you're saying, Ed, this relief that it's actually happened. And I actually found this very interesting because it's a $1 trillion company buys $1 billion company. And the actual reaction of so many players is joy, like they're overjoyed. And I guess the question here, Ed, is like, why are people so happy about this $1 trillion company buying a $1 billion company? Because is it going to actually affect us?
I mean, that ultimately is the big question. What is the impact here for gamers, really? I think there's an element of console wars, of people who have bought an Xbox who just want to have some good games at last, because there haven't been a huge number of big Xbox exclusives this generation. So maybe this could have an impact on that. So I'm sure there are a lot of Xbox fans that are excited about this big deal. There are maybe people that aren't happy about it. There are people who don't want this, as you say, $1 trillion company to have a big monopoly. Is it right for the industry that it's just these conglomerates of huge companies buying each other? There's a lack of competition. You tend to see a lot more innovation coming from smaller indie companies, be that through gameplay, be that through story, being through more diversity. They can move quicker, they can be more flexible. Big companies, something like Starfield has obviously been years in the making, and I think one of the criticisms of it is that it feels a bit lacking. It's something that sort of has sensibilities from 5 years ago. Well, of course, because that's when development started. And it takes a long time for things to be made. I don't think that necessarily we want to have a small number of companies owning all of these other ones. I don't think that's necessarily good. So some people maybe aren't as happy. I think Xbox fans are happy that there are some good games coming. I think there's a sense of relief that it's over after all this time. I think people have got a bit bored with all the stories. And a lot of those stories have been very business-minded about the court cases, about what might happen internally. And I think there are some interesting things there. But to your point, what does this mean for gamers? And for now, I actually don't think it's going to have that big an impact. I think we're not going to see the impact of this for another couple of years, until the dust has settled and we can finally see what games are going to be exclusive, what games aren't. There's been so much talk about Call of Duty and everything else. I think we'll finally see that settle in a couple of years, and then we'll be able to see the impact for gamers.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. And because this deal took so long as well, it's just, there's probably a backlog of just what's supposed to happen during a takeover. And I think when like Microsoft took over Bethesda, that was relatively straightforward, quotation marks, because there wasn't, as far as I'm aware, this amount of legal hurdles that had to be gone through. And then we saw, like, when that announcement and that takeover happened, suddenly there were like Bethesda games on Game Pass. And I think potentially, like, a lot of people were, gamers, and just how fickle we can be sometimes, and expecting, that instant gratification. People were probably expecting, hey, this deal will happen, and by next week after the deal, we'll see World of Warcraft on the Game Pass or something like that. And it's like, well, it doesn't really work like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the first thing that will happen, is that we'll start seeing Activision Blizzard games on Game Pass. Microsoft, their strategy is Game Pass. They want everyone to be signed up to that, as many people as possible, to get as much money as broadly as possible. So padding out their Game Pass catalogue with Activision Blizzard games is absolutely going to be their priority. They've already said it's not going to happen until next year. So it's not they bought the company last week and then day one, bam, here are all these games. It doesn't work like that. And even, yesterday, Phil Spencer was on the Xbox podcast talking about this, saying, it's going to take time. This deal has taken a long time to happen. This isn't an instant thing. So it's going to take time for these games to be on Game Pass, but that, I think, is going to be their first thing, which will be next year. So that will be the first thing people start to see. And from there, I think, honestly, the next thing is going to be more mobile stuff more than anything. I think there's been so much talk around Call of Duty, with it being this huge franchise that makes so much money, and all these PlayStation owners are saying, well, we still want Call of Duty on our console, and all these objections are saying, no, we don't want Microsoft to own this huge franchise. But really, what Microsoft want is king.
Yeah.
They want a mobile company so that they can start planning mobile games and making money out of that. They've already said that they want to have a mobile game marketplace to rival Apple and Google Play. So that really is a big part of that. And I think a lot of gamers who are console gamers, who play on PC, maybe ignore the mobile side of things. But that, I think, is going to be a really, really huge next step for Microsoft. Before we start seeing Call of Duty exclusivity or whatever else is next from Activision Blizzard, I think it's firstly, let's get the catalog on Game Pass, and then it's, right, how can we make money out of mobile gaming?
Yeah, and you mentioned Phil Spencer there as well, who's the head of Xbox, and you mentioned the interview, the podcast on the official Xbox channel, which is worth a listen to actually, because you get to hear this person who's at the top of the chain of Xbox talking about like what their plans are going to be of that. And Marty was actually talking to me before we went live here, and we were just talking about like Phil Spencer's persona against like the head of Activision Blizzard, Bobby Kotick, and it's a very strange comparison, isn't it, between the two?
Yeah, they are very different people. One is liked, one is not. Phil Spencer loves to wear his sort of gamer t-shirts and jeans, and
I was going to say we don't even need to say which one is which at this point.
You know, he likes to sort of be one of the people and appear sort of down to earth. And Bobby Kotick is much more suited CEO who I'm sure would love to be one of the people, but is very much not. He is, I would say, not very liked within his own company, let alone the wider industry. He will not be at Activision Blizzard next year. So end of this year, he's out. January 1st, 2024, no more Bobby Kotick. And I think a lot of people will be very happy with that.
I think, like, again, we mentioned that word relief, and especially in the Blizzard community, I feel like that was the big news, that Bobby Kotick wasn't going to be there anymore. And he's almost been like this, you know, to use a Diablo reference, he's been like that demon, you know, at the top of the pile here, that's just been like overseeing you know, what's been going on in Blizzard. And that's not to say like he is responsible for every single thing that's happened in Blizzard, because there's a lot of moving parts there, but he's almost like the mouthpiece, the person you see when you think of Blizzard Activision. And then you've got now almost, you know, you look over to the other side, and to use a Diablo reference, you've got Phil Spencer, who's almost like this angel. And that this is like the comparison that I'm just seeing from like the communities, like, you know, when you go on social, and it's just really interesting to see that. And Marty, like, what's your sort of perspective between the two, since, you know, like we were talking about that?
I mean, as I said to you before we start recording, I find it so interesting that, you know, Phil is so likable compared to Bobby. And what I'm sort of curious is, you know, is one thing is how, you know, you appear outwards and things like that. I'm just wondering how much it actually, you know, has an effect on the inside of the company. And you know, are we basically just replacing, you know, one CEO with another one, or is there actually going to be some good changes here? I think that's the big question that I have.
Yeah, I mean, both, like you say, outwardly, both CEOs are quite different. Or I say execs are quite different. I don't think it's interesting what you say there about sort of Phil Spencer being the angel. I'm sure Microsoft has its own problems, as every company does. You know, that there's no perfect company. Activision Blizzard is because of the reports definitely seen as a very toxic place. I'm sure even that has changed over the last few years. Obviously, there were a lot of talks about sort of sexual assault allegations and misogyny, homophobia, all these sorts of things, and a really, I think the quote was, a frat boy culture was what Activision Blizzard was described as having. You know, there hasn't been a similar investigation into Microsoft. I would like to think that they have better protocol, and they're a very different organization. I'd love to think that they will come in and shake things up at Activision Blizzard, make sure that they are no longer a toxic place to work. How much that happens, who knows? We'll have to wait and see internally. I think employees internally hopefully are excited about that Microsoft takeover and about the change that will bring. And I think without Bobby Kotick as that sort of figurehead for that culture, hopefully that will make change. But I also think things like culture changes take time. Again, it's not going to be an instant thing. I don't think Microsoft are going to swoop in and start making massive changes. I think they will want to slowly work with Activision Blizzard, see what they can do to change things. And hopefully that change will be positive. But I think there's also a concern around potential layoffs as well. I mean, that I think has been one of the biggest stories in the industry this year, is the amount of layoffs. As much as we've had amazing games and all this money being made, there are a lot of companies that are laying off a lot of staff, and a lot of the time that happens after acquisitions. We've seen Embracer in Sweden buying loads of game studios and then reorganizing that and shifting it and laying people off. Just a couple of weeks ago, Epic Games had a whole round of layoffs, which included Mediatonic, which is the Fall Guys developer. And a load of them, unfortunately, have left. So I think, often you see these big acquisitions, but then as companies get consumed by other ones and absorbed in, you do start to see shifts and changes in structure, and that ultimately does sometimes mean layoffs. So I don't think it's all rosy, Microsoft coming in. I think there hopefully will be some positive cultural changes, but it won't be positive for everyone, I'm sure.
Yeah, and you always bring us back like full circle here, because while there was this like relief again, this excitement, this, what this could possibly mean for us as gamers, there's that realistic thing here where it's like, this company bought this company to make money, and you would be very naive to think if it is that bed of roses that you would suddenly be walking into, where okay, we've got the likes of Diablo and World of Warcraft here as well, where look at those games, like they're like, when you look at comparatively to like mobile gaming or Call of Duty, it's like they don't make as much money as those. And if you think suddenly that Microsoft are going to walk in and go, well, you know what, this people like that game, let's put more devs on it, let's increase the content we're making for that, let's put a real focus on that, it's actually probably not going to happen. Like they might come in and go, that's working pretty well, but maybe we can trim a bit of the fat off here with regards to what's being done, and then save some money there without it having too much of an impact. And like, there's going to be those people that are going to be looking at that, and again, that's something that we as gamers don't really find out about until it's announced.
Yeah, I think Microsoft have also hopefully learned from their acquisition of Bethesda. This year from Bethesda, obviously we've had Starfield as the big game. Before that was Redfall, which was pretty much a failure. It was not the game that Arcane should have made, really. There were a lot of decisions in Bethesda and within Arcane of wanting to do something different, and it not really being in their wheelhouse. And reports came out after the game was released that Microsoft kind of just left them to it. They bought Bethesda and then said, no, we don't want to interfere too much, so we're going to let you do your thing. And actually, it seemed like they needed some interference. They needed some guidance. And Microsoft sort of didn't really do that. And I think, therefore, the game really suffered because they needed that interference. So hopefully Microsoft have learned from that and they can have the right touch with Activision Blizzard. There are some games that I'm sure are very established and do not need help. Obviously WoW, I'm sure, is one of them. Diablo is probably another one. But then also maybe there are other games in development we don't even know about that might need a bit of a push. They've talked as well about going through the back catalogue of Activision Blizzard franchises and IPs to say, right, what can we revive? But they, Phil Spencer, again, on the Xbox podcast, was talking about being very careful with that. It's not just people like Guitar Hero, say, let's bring it back. It's, okay, well, let's speak to the developers in the studios. Let's see what they're passionate about. Let's see what ideas they've got, and work from there. And it's going to be a long time until we start seeing the fruits of that labor, I think, because the game development is a very slow process. And it's going to be a few years before we really start seeing Microsoft reaping the rewards of buying this huge company.
Yeah, and like mentioning Phil Spencer again, and I highly recommend like listening to that podcast where he's talking about like how they hope to handle these new teams, and also he very much had a focus on the word learning as well, and kept bringing that up. And again, my comparison of Phil Spencer as an angel, that was merely just me making a observation from the internet, because again, I think it's important with everything happening in the game industry, like not to put people on pedestals, because I think that's a dangerous thing, and that's what happened at Blizzard and Blizzard Activision. And going forward then, Marty, with all these possible things that could happen, like what would you say is the thing, what would you hope for that will happen in, as a knock-on effect of Microsoft taking over Blizzard, and take a positive look at it. What's like, a good thing that could happen from this?
I mean, one thing that I hope is that Blizzard gets a little bit back to the roots, if that makes sense, where, we're not shipping a game until it's done. Blizzard used to be like a stamp of approval that this game is good quality, like a quality stamp. And I just think there's been too many releases in the past, I don't know how many years, where that has not been the case any longer. And I sort of hope that I don't know if it will be, but that would be my hopes, at least, that maybe this will have like a positive effect, and that will be like a focus again.
Oh, I thought you were going to say creepers in World of Warcraft, but there we go.
I want a creeper mount, sure, I'll take it.
Ed, as a gamer, what would you hope that this deal brings us? And be optimistic.
As a gamer, I mean, as a journalist, I guess there's the sort of slight business side of I hope that Activision Blizzard lands on its feet, and I hope that the people there are able to improve the culture, as we talked about. As a gamer, I would love to see PlayStation have a bit more competition. I think PlayStation have absolutely won this console war, if you want to say, this generation. It's miles ahead of Microsoft. Xbox has not had the exclusives that Sony have, and that's great for PlayStation fans. But I think it would be great to see Microsoft bounce back with some really good exclusives, and some good new games. I think it's interesting that we look at, okay, they own Call of Duty, they own Diablo, World of Warcraft, everything else, but hopefully those teams can be given the chance to come up with something brand new. Something like Bethesda this year releasing Hi-Fi Rush from Tango Gameworks. That was a brilliant new game that was developed, within this time, that was really exciting and really different. And so I would love to see something brand new come out of these Activision Blizzard studios.
I find it really interesting that you say that, that you bring up exclusivity, because one of the reasons I actually really do like Xbox is that there aren't that many exclusives, that they are like, we want to be there for everyone. And it's one of the reasons why I sort of dislike PlayStation a little bit, because, I have an Xbox. There's a few certain games that I need a PlayStation to be able to play, and I hate that.
That's fair. I mean, I'm in all honesty, I've grown up on Nintendo and PlayStation, so they both are very much all around exclusives. That's kind of, I guess, been part of me gaming, really, has been around that. And yeah, I think it's great to have an Xbox and be able to play all the big releases, and that's great. I do still feel like exclusivity will come into play at some point here. At the end of the day, my view is that you don't spend 69 billion on a company to not have exclusive games and try and make money out of that. And that was a big argument against this acquisition, was, well, look at the precedence of Bethesda. They bought Bethesda and suddenly all Bethesda games are exclusive. Starfield originally was being developed for PlayStation and now is an Xbox exclusive. I think we will see future Activision Blizzard games be Xbox exclusives. Maybe that will help to boost some sales, or maybe we'll start seeing more games on Game Pass on multiple platforms, which is also a great deal. Xbox, Game Pass is great.
So we know that we're probably not going to see any of the Activision Blizzard backlog on Game Pass until next year. That's pretty much been confirmed by Phil Spencer. But what do you think they're gonna headline out there with regards to Blizzard Activision games? I'll start with Ed.
Oh, that's a very interesting question. I mean, I guess it's, in some ways, it's what's the biggest IP. In some ways, that is worth headlining. But Call of Duty's had so much talk around it that I don't think that's going to be exclusive to Xbox anytime soon. I think Call of Duty coming to Game Pass will be absolutely massive. And I think what they might end up doing is releasing it on PlayStation as well, but it being part of Game Pass means that more people will flock to that because it's part of their subscription. And with multiplayer being so big for Call of Duty, if all of your friends are playing on Xbox, then you're going to want to play on Xbox as well. I'm sure they'll have some sort of cross-platform play as well. But I think Call of Duty coming to Game Pass will be huge. Whether something like Diablo comes to it, or WoW, I don't know if they will do that yet. I feel like those games are maybe bigger with the PC market than console, maybe. So I don't know if that's quite as big a headline, because obviously Xbox and Game Pass are on PC, but I feel like Xbox is a bit more of a console brand. So if they're trying to push Xbox specifically, I feel like Call of Duty is the big one that they will try and headline. But as I said before, I'd also love to see something brand new of like, here's this really cool new franchise that they've come up with, and this is what we want to push. I'd love to see that.
I mean, one game I could potentially see being an exclusive to Xbox could be the new survival game that we know that Blizzard is working on. That could be a possibility. We don't know too much about it yet, but maybe we will in a few weeks.
Ed's already vetoed it, Marty. But we are a World of Warcraft podcast here. You might not quite know it today, but this is all connected, and it will have an impact on you. It might have an impact on us one way or another. But Marty, World of Warcraft on Game Pass, prediction, is it ever going to happen?
I mean, I don't know about ever, but I cannot see that happening right now. I would love it to have to pay one subscription, absolutely. But I think WoW is still such a large game, and that subscription alone earns so much money that I'm having a difficulty seeing them just including it into the Game Pass, and I think that would lose money by doing that. So I don't see that happening, at least not right now. Maybe in the future, who knows? But or maybe there will be another tier of the Game Pass where WoW is included, something along those lines, perhaps. But I don't see them. I'm very sorry to everyone who's listening or watching that. I don't see that happening right now.
My outlandish prediction is we will see World of Warcraft on Steam before we see it on Game Pass. There we go. That's interesting. That's one you can revisit in 5 to 10 years and tell me how terribly wrong I was. I'd also be remiss not to mention potentially the likes of StarCraft or Heroes of the Storm getting some sort of injection after it's been pretty much left with a skeleton crew to run those games. And maybe we can only hope that perhaps some of the games that have not seen so much love for many, many years get a resurgence, or like Ed says as well, maybe something within the Blizzard world or even the Warcraft world, some sort of spin-off, just a small little project that could come from perhaps, as a domino effect of Microsoft taking over. But we are in a world of uncertainty. We're in a world of opportunity, but and also it's a scary time. It's a scary time. It's like all the emotions mixed up in one.
It's funny you say it's a scary time. It's a time of uncertainty, but I think I think it's also exciting to see what's going to happen. It's such a historic thing in the games industry. It's a huge moment. So I think there's a lot of excitement. As much as there's uncertainty, there's a lot of excitement as to what could happen here. And as a journalist, it definitely interests me to think, right, well, what stories are going to come out of this? We've already had so many stories, especially in terms of leaked documentation and all this other stuff that's come out. It's been a really interesting 20 months to see how these two companies, Sony and Microsoft, compete with one another, like school children. A lot of the time, it's been quite petty. So it's been interesting to see that, and I'm definitely, with my journalist hat on, I'm interested to see what is going to happen next out of this for sure.
Wasn't there something? Remind me a little bit about the history of Activision Blizzard, because wasn't there like a different company that was about to buy or got bought out by Activision back in the day that people didn't like? I think it was something with a V. Vivaldi or...
Oh, now you're testing my knowledge.
Trust Marty to go off script here, right at the end as well.
Well, if you're thinking of a V, there was Vicarious Visions, which was absorbed into Blizzard and became Blizzard Albany.
No, that's not it. It might be a different letter line, but I just feel like there was a company that owned a lot of Blizzard or were about to buy a lot of Blizzard, and people really didn't like that company. And then Activision came about and bought them out or something like that, and everybody was, really happy about, Blizzard being saved back in the day. And it's sort of like the similar situation that we have right now. So I can't, the person that just absolutely have to look at this with a little bit of a a negative point of view cannot stop thinking that, is this just the beginning of another of those situations?
I mean, it absolutely could well be. We will have to find out. I mean, good old Wikipedia's come through. You were right, it's Vivendi. So 2008, Activision merged with Vivendi, which culminated in the inclusion of the Blizzard brand in the title of the holding company. So that's when they became Activision Blizzard.
We've been on a whirlwind trip here, a whirlwind of emotions. And while we're saying that this is the end of, Microsoft closing on the deal with Activision Blizzard, some might say we're just getting started. My name has been Tom. That's been Marty. We've been joined by Ed, and we've been talking WoW. Well, mostly.
Thanks for tuning in, champion. Did you enjoy this episode of Talking WoW? If so, why not drop a review on your podcast catcher of choice, or leave us a comment. You can find Talking WoW on Twitter or YouTube over at Talking WoW. Hope to see you again soon.